I'm just gonna start by putting it out there. This isn't an I hate Taylor video. I'm sorry. Personally, I self identify as a Swiftie. And while I think there are a lot of really great things on this album, I do think that there are some things that need some work. I am a layered person with layered opinions, and I hope we can have a civil conversation about it in the comments. TTPD came out a couple weekends ago, and what's another person with another set of thoughts? Hi, I'm Sharri. I'm a PhD candidate in historical musicology and a popular music scholar. And in my everyday life, I study the correlation between whiteness and contemporary Christian music. But today, I'm going to be reviewing the Tortured Poets Department and the Anthology. If you found me here from my TikTok, thank you for being here. I do talk about non-Taylor Swift things sometimes. I review pop music and I talk about the broader happenings in the pop music community. So go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified when I upload a new video. So before I get started, I'm gonna say this video isn't going to be a breakdown of every single reference in every single song. There are so many creators on YouTube and TikTok, and I have linked some below, and I have reposted so many on my TikTok that I like. If I did a song analysis, this video would take years because there's literally 31 of them. Okay, so go ahead and subscribe. Follow me on TikTok at the Contemp Musicologist, and you can go to the little icon that says repost to find some of the creators that I've loved their analyses for TTPD. Second thing is that this video isn't going to be shutting down any conversations about who these songs may or may not be about, who they're referencing. This is my perspective based on my lived experience and expertise in music and the fandom. And I don't know. I think this, I really understand where people are coming from with this concern of, this song isn't about Maddie or Joe. No, it's about Taylor. On the surface, I really understand where you're coming from. It's really reflexive to defend Taylor in these moments, especially since she has spoken pretty plainly that she doesn't want to be reduced to who she is or isn't dating. But believe it or not, speculating on who a piece of art is or is not about is actually an important part of the analytic process. It's just not possible to give a real or adequate close reading without considering the entirety of the circumstances and the people and their positionality and their life circumstances of the people who wrote or created that art. I think a really great example of this in the classical music world is Franz Schubert. For years, musicologists have been asking whether or not he's gay. And by being able to ask questions about his sexual identity, we've been able to open up to queer readings about his work and gain insight in how he lived his possible queerness in a time that likely only tolerated a certain amount of eccentricity, but not actually being in a partnership with a same-gender person. So without going through detail by detail, I'm just going to really quickly slap a couple slides of who I think each song is about. Go ahead and pause to read. But I'll also just say while you're reading that I think these songs are likely a mix of multiple people in and around Taylor's life. I think Thank You, Amy is a really great example of this. Obviously, there's a very specific, rhetorical call out with her capitalizing some letters. In that this song is, at least in part, about Kim Kardashian, and I really respect that. But I also think that Taylor is a lot more than she looks. And since she does say in the lyrics that only you and I will know who you're talking about, it's likely that that song is also about someone else. I think perhaps a childhood friend. Anyway, so all that said, here are some of the things I was hearing on the songs. So obviously this, in the weeks before Taylor put out this album, she did a set of playlists with Apple Music based around the cycle of grief. And there are 5. Let's see if I remember all 5 of them. Grief, no. Delusion or denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and acceptance. And I think it's really clear if you really want to to dial these songs into where each of them belong amongst those stages of grief. In fact, I think that Taylor has already done this and added all of these songs to which playlist they belong in. Anyway, just to give a quick what I think about all of these songs, putting them together in groups, I think Fortnite featuring Post Malone has a bit of a funky bass riff at the bottom, but I don't believe that it's an acoustic bass. I do think that it's happening on synth, and that really does carry into the theming and Down Bad. I love the chorus on this. I honestly can't believe there isn't like a viral TikTok dance for this. The verses are themselves really sparse, but then the chorus, the way that the sounds all come together in the chorus, I think actually pull together the theming of desire and what this track is trying to do. I think that Tortured Poets Apartment, My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys, Guilty as Sin, and Clarabow all go together. On TTPD, we start is like very Midnight's oriented. There's strong pedal tones throughout. And usually that is a grounding influence in music. But in this song, it feels like it's more about upheaval. And I think that there's a certain irony in that, using a pedal tone to express not stability but instability. But also there's that high-pitched synth sound that always sounds like things are sparkling. My first listen, I thought I was hearing the song Question in here, which is really interesting because Question is a song written solely by Taylor, but TTPD is written with her and Jack Antonoff, I believe. I didn't write that in my notes. My boy only breaks his favorite toys. I think this is the only song on the album I truly don't personally like. I don't think it's a bad song. It's just not for me. The drum plus the synth just doesn't feel super well thought out, especially since this isn't really sung. It's more speech sung, if that makes sense. It feels a little bit underproduced, and then that final build up just doesn't really go anywhere. I think it can be really interesting if there's like a lot of orchestration and that speech singing, or there's that speech singing and there's a lot of things going together. But I've been hearing a lot of criticism that this album feels like a set of poems set to music, and I think that this is like the perfect explanation of that. It just doesn't feel like it was really ever meant to be a song. Guilty as Sin, I think, is the most Taylor of all of the songs on this album. It reminds me most of Wildest Dreams. One of my students, just to mention this, also said that they heard Labyrinth in there. I personally, in the honestly like 6 or 7 or 8 times I've listened to it now, still do not hear Labyrinth on this, but you let me know in the comments. Do you hear Labyrinth on Guilty as Sin? What am I missing? But there's a punk guitar, a lot of metric strumming, but then it like turns into this easy breezy Megan Rogers-esque style synth pop, which is a sound I actually really like. And there is just something so sensual and like bad girl, me, the ex-evangelical, who's getting to experience a lot of feelings and emotions I was not allowed to when I was a child in a Christian church, about just like singing the song like singing the words, he's written mine on his upper thigh. Wild. Clara Bow does a lot of these things too. It took me a while to figure out what the quotations were doing. I was definitely very confused in my, like, when I first heard this for the first time at like 1:45 in the morning. But yeah, I think the quotations are things that people have said to Taylor and to women in the industry. And to actually just take a pause here, I see a lot of people critiquing Taylor about like being afraid of like being superseded, and this like seeming fear that she has that people like Sabrina Carpenter or Olivia Rodrigo or Chappell Roan, who knows, are going to like become the new her. And while that seems, I can understand why to an outside listener or onlooker that might seem like just really self-centered. I don't know that that's like unwarranted of a fear in an industry that has a very specific history of commodifying women, of really just saying that women in this industry are objects and not people. And one day she is going to get too old. Some very rich white man is going to decide that she's gotten too old and is going to try to replace her with a younger, skinnier, prettier model. I understand that fear. So Long London, I've heard a lot of people say that this sounds like Wedding Bells, but for me, the most immediate thing I heard was a callback to All You Had to Do Was Stay in from 1989 and Death by a Thousand Cuts on Lover. Um, Obviously, the person who 1989 was written about is not who So Long London was about, but Death by a Thousand Cuts is theoretically who So Long London was about. So the idea that they are like beginning and ends to a relationship, a period of time, a period in her life, actually, I think is really artistic and really beautiful. And um, for the sake of narrative, like putting bookends on this time in her life, I think is really cool, especially since so many of us were expecting this album to be entirely about Joe Alwyn, and it turns out it is about that unfortunate period in her life when she was dating Matty Healy. Um, I don't know. This So Long London does feel like the nice bookend to the Lover period. So, um, the pulsing drum beat feels like a heart racing with anxiety. This is definitely not a track to give someone CPR to. Um, I will say, I think this is a little bit weak for a track five compared to things like You're on Your Own Kid from Midnights or My Tears Ricochet from Folklore or All Too Well from Red, and then of course the 10-minute version. I actually think maybe track shot five should have gone to Loss of My Life, um, which to talk about in itself is like one of the few songs where she feels like she's full fledged singing on. I think this one is for the folklore girlies. Would I consider myself a folklore girly? I'm not sure. This is my, I think, most recent ranking of Taylor Swift albums. Let me know what you think. I've heard that this ranking is the hottest of all takes. So I don't know. Let me know what you think. But something I really like about Loss of My Life is that Taylor's really full fledged singing on this one, but she's singing in her at the very bottom of her range, which is my favorite place where Taylor sings. Taylor is a true alto, which is rare actually. A lot of people who call themselves altos are actually just mezzo sopranos, but Taylor is a true alto. She has a gorgeous and beautiful lower range. We hear it so much on Folklore and Evermore, and it comes out again a little bit in this album, and I just love it so much. And I think that this is perhaps why she gets so many accusations that she can't sing, which is just tacitly untrue. I think that there might have been some credit to those accusations when she was 15 and singing the national anthem at like sports games. I don't know. All sports are the same to me. I'm not gonna lie. And singing the national anthem before games and such, and even her like first few like live tours. But she put in the work. You can tell she hired a voice trainer. She put in the work, and now she can sing. I think quite well. And maybe she doesn't have the range or the dexterity of someone like Ariana Grande or Beyonce or Kelly Clarkson, but I think what she does have, she uses beautifully. It's not bad, it's just different. And I wonder if there's like, I don't know, any way that we could change that narrative, like, or just end this like silly narrative that Taylor can't sing, because it's just not true. Loss of My Life is the very first track that sounds a lot like contemporary Christian music, and I really wish I could play you some of these songs, but unfortunately, the copyright monsters will simply not let me do that. So, if you have time, go take a look at songs like Praise You in This Storm by Casting Crowns, You Say by Lauren Daigle, and Oceans by Hillsong Worship, which is a song that is tied to a lot of personal trauma for me, and oddly went viral on TikTok last year, and was very confusing for me, because it was used like as an inspirational song, but it's just not that. Anyway, if you are going to take a journey into what CCM sounds like because you like Taylor, just promise me you're not going to get radicalized, okay? Look me in the eye. Look me in the eye. Promise me you're not going to get radicalized, okay? And if you do get radicalized, don't tell people that I'm the one who sent you to go listen to CCM, okay? Some of the best bridges on the album. Here we go. But Daddy, I Love Him. Crazy. Who's Afraid of Little Old Me? And The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived. I think again, all three of these fall into that same category of just sounding a lot like contemporary Christian music, specifically in "But Daddy I Love Him." The last like half a minute of the songs, there's a lot of vocalizations that are like riffing off of lines in the song, but they're really disjunct. That's a very specific archetype of CCM. When I was listening to that track, I was imagining, I hope there's a photo on screen for you, but I was specifically like imagining what like the drums being set up in one of those like glass drum cages, because rock drummers are amazing and they like take it too far all the time. But that's like all I could see. Who's Afraid of Little Old Me is I think my favorite song that Taylor has written and produced all by herself since Speak Now. And The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived is the best bridge since All Too Well, the 10 Minutes version. Fight me. I don't care. Yeah, fight me. I think it is the best bridge since All Too Well, the 10-minute version. It is just such a fantastic song. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Fresh Out the Slammer, The Alchemy, and My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys. Again, these feel like poems set to music, not songs. The words feel very disconnected from the score. Maybe what I'm identifying is a sparseness, which I don't, is perhaps not a bad thing. It's just not to my taste. I really like fully kitted out songs that have a lot of energy, a lot of synth fill, a lot of heavy guitar, heavy drums, heavy bass. But these songs are just, they don't have that. And even when like in the chorus or in the bridges, when they start to get filled out a little bit more, they still feel like they're reaching for something to just complete it, to just put the bow on top of the package for me. Yeah. Florida. Rhyming a town you're just a guest in Destin is pretty amazing. That I don't know, that's hilarious. I didn't know whether or not I was supposed to take this song seriously when I first listened to it, but I think at the end of the day this is really just escapism, and it's supposed to be this idea that like we all just want to run away sometimes. I will put here, if I remember, a creator that I saw on TikTok talking about that it is a little bit disconnected from reality, that moving to Florida is not realistic for like most people, but we'll talk about class consciousness later. This song, I felt like I was hearing some memories of "'Tis the Damn Season," which right now I can't remember if that's off of Folklore or Evermore. But yeah, I heard someone say on TikTok that the 1 2 3 4 1 2 drum beats in the chorus are the University of Florida fight song. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that true? Let me know. I could have researched it. I didn't want to. I've been busy. I'm in paper grading hell right now. Yeah, I think the only maybe anecdotal thing I'll say to this is I deeply don't understand the desire to escape to Florida. Maybe because I've actually lived there, and so I know that like it just, if you don't golf, and like eventually Disney gets old and going to the beach gets old, and then what's left is a bunch of like cranky snowbirds who are like longing for the good old days that they think existed, but is really just the good old days when they could say whatever they wanted and not get in trouble. Yeah, nobody in my family lives in Florida anymore. I think that's all I have to say about that. Okay, I Can Do It With a Broken Heart is one of my favorites on this album. I don't know, I could say that about a lot of these songs though, right? But it's a 70s and 80s synth pop disco masterpiece. No notes. I would change absolutely nothing. If you haven't yet, make sure you stop and listen to the final 30 seconds of that song just without singing along, so you would hear everything going on, because it's just like beautiful. I just want to talk about this one line. He said he'd love me for all time, but that time was quite short. um that one, honestly, like when I listened to it, that one broke me, because 6 years feels like such a long time, but like in comparison to a lifetime, if somebody could only give you 6 years, that's like they've really given you nothing, have they? Oh gosh, that one brought up some evangelical trauma for me, I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, I think was written for the students, the what else? It's written for the students. It's written for the doctors, for the lawyers, for the I don't know, Americans trying to exist in what America of 2024 has been like recently. Yeah. Um. Anyway, okay. I'm about to say something that's gonna trip up a lot of Swifties. Prepare your heart, guard your heart, okay? The Black Dog, The Albatross, How Did It End, Cassandra, and Robin, all the exact same song. I Yeah, I, you know, there's something to be said about homogeneity. Because I really don't like when I listen to an album and it feels like all of the songs on the album belonged on different albums or belonged to different singers. So I actually really like how connected this album is. Um, but I do just feel like all of these songs are piano with soft synth backtracks. Um, and I don't know. I just maybe to be specific, when I was listening to these all of these songs, which I believe are all from the anthology, at this point like 2:33 in the morning, and just thinking like. I remember the next day wanting to go back to listen to How Did It End, and I had to go through all five of these songs again, over and over again, to decide which one of them had made me feel the way it made me feel at 3 a.m. because they all sounded the same to me. And at 3 a.m., I was not in the process of like taking down lyrics. Yeah. Does that mean that they're bad songs? No. I just, 31 songs in an album is really heavy. I don't think I've ever made it through the whole album in one sitting other than like my first listen through at my listening party. And even then, like the last five songs are a blur to me. And I just wonder if like all five of these, and honestly probably a few more on the album, had been held back for vault tracks or for a deluxe release, if like as consumers we might have been able to appreciate them more. Yeah, great songs. Did they need to be on this album? I'm not sure. Okay, and then the last song I want to talk about is The Prophecy. I think this is by far my favorite song on this album. This is the song that I don't even really have any notes about it because I think I just trusted myself to talk about it. This is the song that I listened to and I was like, I'm in a public space. I can't break down right now. And had to like stop myself and be like, it's gonna be okay. So, and then I wrote down the word seven. Seven is from folklore, and something about the please in the chorus, beginning of the chorus, that like plea, made me think about Seven, her longing for her childhood. And I just, I don't know, this, like, to talk about prophecy again, I don't even know if this is really specifically connected to this song, but this and the manuscript, which I don't think is one I've brought up, that Taylor gets a lot of hate because she's a very privileged person, that there's no mediating that. She just is a very privileged person. In fact, she's a billionaire, which by definition means she is a person who A, hoards wealth, and B, exploits people below her to gain wealth. And that's something I've been trying to wrestle with as a person who loves her music, but I don't love her lifestyle. Um, but all that to say is, like, Taylor is a woman who's been in this industry since she was 15, been in the public eye since she was 15. And despite all of her privilege, I think the correlation, and I mean, Taylor says this herself on this album in Fortnite, the correlation between child actors or child entertainers and alcoholism is terrifying to me. And like her privilege has never mediated her trauma for her. And it has never somehow made it easier to feel loved or feel less unseen or less heartbroken, or less victimized by very powerful men, which I would include Scooter Braun, Scott Borchetta, and Kanye West, in and amongst all of these powerful men who have like tried to victimize her, and in a space where people are so keyed into her very real privilege and the fact that she often weaponizes her privilege against people, which is a conversation for another day. If you're really interested in this conversation, we'll have it. I will have it, and I will make a whole video about it. She is trying to exist in an industry that is so keyed in on her privilege, that they're unwilling to see the ways in which people, and specifically men, have harmed her. So to go back to like who are all of these songs about, and while I do really believe that all of these songs have like a core person at heart, they're probably about everyone. And then like songs can float free, like after they've been written and produced and put out into the world, they can float free. I have seen so many retellings of But Daddy I Love Him from queer people, from people with evangelical guilt, people who are. One of my students turned in a really beautiful essay about how But Daddy I Love Him really helped him process and like an abusive teacher that he had in middle school. So I think that Taylor Swift songs can be a lot of things, and that was is like the prophecy. I think perfectly exemplifies that for me. I think on this album is doing a couple of things. Taylor is really desiring to renegotiate her relationship with her fans. On tracks like "But Daddy, I Love Him," "I Can Fix Him," "No, Really, I Can," and "I Can Do It with a Broken Heart." Taylor is really putting forward like, hey, sometimes I'm a really screwed up person, sometimes I make really silly and stupid mistakes. Please don't put me put me on a pedestal. Please don't make me your Jesus Christ. Um, please don't make me your role model for little girls. And I think that this is an interesting way to renegotiate the boundary you set with your fans. Taylor's version of parasocialism has always been really interesting to me because for most other artists, um, fans have a relationship with Taylor, but fans have a relationship with that artist, but that artist doesn't really have a relationship with Taylor. But Taylor has built a career off of welcoming people into her home, bringing cookies to bringing cookies to her interviews with radio hosts. Those are just like a couple things off the top of my head. Um, and I think that that is, like, for better or worse, why fans feel like they get to have a say in her private life, and to comment on it. And I don't know. Maybe I speak to this a little bit later when we're talking specifically about the critique. Um, but I don't know that fans I really understand after being in the public eye for 15 plus years why Taylor is feeling like, man, I would really just love it if people would leave me alone and stop making judgments about who I date. But I also think that as a public figure, your fans get to tell you when you're doing things that no longer align with their values. Um, and it's one thing if it's just like, we don't like that you're dating a football player. I think I can agree with Taylor that that's really dumb. Um, we don't like it that you're dating a man who satirically, it's going to be written on screen because I don't think that I can say it. That's another. Um, this album is really self-referential. It and that's not a bad thing, but it's self-referential. I think in the first time we've seen not even only since Midnight's, but like perhaps even since like going back like Speak Now, where she's not even just talking about heartbreak, but she's actually like diving deep and talking about um like the deep and disturbed like things going on in her mind, um which is honestly I think so brave of Taylor to just be like, here's my journal, read it. um which makes me also think of like this tortured poets idea. um she's aligning herself with the tortured poets, of which poet, my poet and my friend Stephanie Birch has written for the New York Times, how Taylor's relationship with the tortured poets. But I think the main and the one that we understand, she has already aligned herself with poets in pieces like The Lakes, but now she is aligning herself with the tortured poets like Sylvia Plath. I wonder if she's counting people in her life like Maddie Healy and Joe Alwyn. As a part of those poets, but in this renegotiating of her boundaries, in this intriguingly self-referential album, I think what she's done, however intentionally or unintentionally, is maybe just about is sort of alienating people in a little way. I think that this album is speaking to people in a lot of ways, but from what I can tell, just from meditating on this album myself, but also just seeing what people are saying about it on the internet, like people either get it or they don't. But it's not heartbreak for Taylor. This album is expressing heartbreak for themselves. but there's still a bit of frustration with Taylor, which I think is fair, but maybe we'll talk about a little bit later. Let's continue. The second half of this album, the anthology, is so musical theater coded. Songs like The Manuscript, Robin, Peter, Cassandra, Chloe or Sam or Sophia or Marcus. These are the ones that I have in my notes, but honestly, so many more of them are so musical theater coded. I was immediately thinking of plays like Dear Evan Hansen. I was thinking of, oh, actually, I maybe musical theater people might not like this, but Frozen. But many like character-led Waitress, real-world character-led stories. You know, and all of Taylor's songs do tend to be very story-forward, but there was something about the way the piano lead-in, the sparse speech like singing before you got into the chorus that sounded like a recitative and an aria. I don't really feel like explaining what those two things are, but pause to read. I'll put them up on the screen, okay? You know, and Taylor has always been that ingenue. She is the main character. It's her world, and we're all living in it. Personally, happy to. But I do think in this, we're calling this all a narration of Taylor's life. She is the main character, but she's also a bit of an unreliable narrator. And I think for me, this shows in a couple of ways. I think the first way is something that unfortunately, I heard at one point from Gabby Hanna, and even though I have thoughts about Gabby Hanna, I do think that this statement in itself is true, is that there are three sides to every story: side A, side B, and the truth. And in and of itself, we are only hearing Taylor's side. And I'm happy to trust Taylor's side. I think her feelings are justified, but we don't really know what happened. I'll get into that more later. But also, I think the other way that we see this unreliable narrator is that there is seemingly a bit of a broken metaphor in this idea of the tortured poets department. I've heard some people say it's not the tortured poets department, apostrophe S on poets, it's the department where they torture poets. So who is the poet being tortured? Is Taylor the poet being tortured, or is that Maddie or Joe? Or is Taylor torturing the poets? Or is Taylor being tortured? But it's also a university where poets and critics and overthinkers thrive, and Taylor wants to count herself amongst those, which is fine. And I think that is where a lot of the branding for this album was leaning into beforehand. It's also a psych ward where people have big feelings and romantic ideas about the world, but they get forced into compliance. And it's also a courtroom where poets are on trial as both plaintiff and defendant. And I don't know. I suppose this album could be all of those things separately. But they are not all of those things together. And then Taylor also calls herself chairman of the Tortured Poets Department. I think it's unclear to me exactly what that means. Maybe it is all of these things, but I don't know that these things work together. They don't layer. Which I think gets me into this, what is really confusing to me about this album, in that it is maybe in this album, she's setting herself up in many ways, as she does in throughout her whole discography, as the victim. But also for the first time, we start to see herself as maybe also aligning herself with the accused. I like this idea that maybe some of these things are her fault, and that perhaps she is trying to take accountability for those things. And I think maybe the last thing I noticed that there's a moment, and I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, where she says, she quotes people saying she's having the time of her life. And it's like, I distinctly remember from my tour night, which was Gillette's night 2, the night that it poured, I had the time of my life. I still want to go back to a night where maybe it isn't cold and rainy. But she said to us on camera, and I do believe that she was dating Maddie Healy at this time, that she was so happy. And I think I don't know, when you are in the depth of a mental health crisis, like Taylor says that she was in this time, you say a lot of things that you don't believe. Um, but my first listen on this made me feel bad almost for making her perform while she was like in the depth of this grief. Um, Even though like you were telling us you were happy, um, and I'm feeling a little bit like it feels a little unfair to say that we were demanding more from you while you were in the depth of your grief when you were telling us that you were perfectly happy and we were happy for you because you seemed really happy. So I don't know. This is a topic I'm really uncomfortable with. Aaron Dessner versus Jack Antonoff. I don't know why it makes me so uncomfortable. I think it's because like in my initial review, my like initial thoughts that I posted on TikTok, I did say that I preferred the Aaron Dessner tracks, and I stand by that. I don't think that I said anything wrong. But what unintentionally happened was a lot of people joining my comments to say really mean things about Jack Antonoff, and that I don't stand by. I think Jack Antonoff's a really cool person. I really have enjoyed his music production. I think that there might be something to the idea that maybe he and Taylor should take a break from each other. Um, but I don't know. Also, if you've developed the kind of relationship of trust that I think that they have with each other, as a person who writes, I only send my writing to a select group of people. It would be asking a lot to just suddenly work with someone new, right? But I don't know. To speak to this whole synth pop conversation or this over synth, the idea that this album was over synthed, which I do think to an extent it was. If Taylor grew up in the kind of evangelical churches that her like family history suggests, at least suggests to me that she did, I think that there may be a certain sonic comfort zone in like Jack Antonoff's version of synth pop. When I was telling a friend that this album sounds so much like CCM to me, he actually said like all of her songs sound like CCM to me. And I don't know, maybe it's just like distance. I'm no longer listening to that music every single day. But I feel like this is the album for the first time that I was like, yeah, maybe there have been some callbacks to it in the past, but this is the first one that I was like, oh, like I could feel myself raising my hands in the same way that I would have in a worship service 4 or 5 years ago. Um, and I think actually that is really cool work that it's doing. I don't know if that's intentional, perhaps, but I think it's really cool that she is using a CCM sound and the language of Christian trauma to talk about her heartbreak. Um, Maybe this will only make sense to people who've had, quote, relationships with Jesus. Which sounds so silly when you say it that way, but like every breakup I've been through has felt the exact same as deconstructing did. And I really understand using the language of Christian trauma to talk about heartbreak because Christian trauma is heartbreak. Which is why, I don't know, I think there's an excellent metaphor. I was really impressed by all of the biblical language she was using, especially specifically Sarah's and Hannah's in their Sunday best. Sarah and Hannah are both really important biblical figures. Again, not something I super duper want to get into, but I'll leave a link below if you're super interested in reading the specific biblical stories. If you walked into a Christian megachurch right now and just said the word Sarah, I bet at least 40 people would turn around. By saying, these are the Christian girls who keep tormenting me, I thought that was just actually really cool. Specifically, the back half of this album starts with something that is really unique to contemporary megachurches, where they will start with a note or a chord on the synth and they just hold it. It just holds for several minutes at a time, sometimes 4, 5, 6 minutes at a time, often while a pastor is praying. Or just like and you're encouraged to keep your eyes closed while they're like setting up things, and the churches are just such a performance space. It's so anyway, and they're like setting the mood in the time before worship begins, like in earnest. And if you're really interested in more of that, maybe I'll make a video at it someday. Eventually I'll publish my dissertation. Just make me a promise that you'll buy my book when it comes out. But yeah, this album in particular just had so many specific sonic and metrical callbacks to CCM, and I just think that that is so freaking cool. Um, I think that there is a little bit of genre trouble on this album. Um, it was a little bit unclear to me if it was, I mean, Apple Music calls it pop. I didn't look up what Spotify calls it, but I assume Spotify also calls it pop. Um, but like, is it indie folk? Because there are so many songs on this that I was like, oh, this belonged on Evermore and Folklore. And there are other songs that I was like, this feels like it's Midnight's. But also, Evermore, Folklore, and Midnight's are over here. um, and they come together a little bit. I think the Anthology, which is um, mostly Aaron Dessner songs, pushes those two things together, which is this sound that I would call contemporary Christian. So I don't know. I was gonna make a joke, contemporary Christian music, Taylor's version, but the blasting horns outside ruined it. Anyway, also the lyricism on this album is maddeningly unhinged. I can't imagine that this is an album Taylor like. This is certainly an album that a 19-year-old Taylor could have written, but I'm unconvinced that a 19-year-old Taylor would have gotten away with it. I think that this is the only kind of album that at 34, when Taylor goes to her label and they're like, you can do whatever you want, and her fans are like, me included, are like, you can do whatever you want. And before somebody says, that's not me saying that her music is juvenile, I actually think that is a really distasteful thing to say, not only about Taylor's music but about like as a critique in general. It suggests that like children can't produce good art, and that having really big feelings is like only something that children experience. And I do think it's really interesting that people only apply the word juvenile to women's music, to art created by women. I just think it's really stupid. Yeah, all that to say is that like I don't think that she would have gotten away with saying the insane things that she does on this album, like the smallest man who ever lived. um did you keep a gun under our bed? Did you like, I'm miserable and nobody knows, try and come for my job? Yeah, I don't think she would have gotten away with any of that stuff at 19. And I think it is a testament to the respect that people in this industry have of Taylor, that they let her put out this album. And I'm really glad that they did, because this album does a lot of things for me personally. Now, the big deal items: the accidental racism and the class unconsciousness. Um, let's just talk about the brief moment of class unconsciousness. And I don't know if there was a couple more, but the only one that I really noticed was this idea that if you are sad, you should just pick up and move to Florida. And yes, because I know somebody's going to say it. I know it's a metaphor. I know it's a metaphor. But also, we have to ask questions about, like, what kind of work our metaphor is doing, right? Okay. Um, uh, most people don't get to just leave the space that they're in when they're uncomfortable. We can tell that this is true right now, as Rafah and Gaza and the West Bank have been turned into militarized zones, and people are having to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to like get their families out and leave their homes and cede their space to a colonizing effort. Most people don't get to just escape their lives. And I do think that there is a little bit of distastefulness in Taylor, a person with a lot of privilege who can literally just pick up and go to a private island one day if she wants to, talking about how much she wants to escape her life, while there is so much grief going around, like around the world right now. And that's not to say that like people with wealth can't experience trauma and can't experience grief. I'm never going to be the person that's like, I keep seeing this some version of this, like the like you wouldn't last an hour in the asylum where they raped me, and they're showing a photo of her house in Pennsylvania, which was a good criticism when she was saying, I was raised on a farm, no, it wasn't a mansion, and I bet you think about me. But it's not a good criticism now, because she was a child being abused by an industry that she should not have been allowed to be in until she was an adult. Period. Full stop. That said, like, she's a very privileged person now, and she has so many resources ahead of her. Maybe this is just coming. Actually, I will follow up that thought later. She says in the song Fresh Out of the Slammer, and she's talking about years of labor. It's unclear to me if the labor is hers or Maddie's or Joe's. Again, I just think that that's a little bit silly. Nobody's contesting this idea that Taylor doesn't work hard. Taylor works super freaking hard. You heard her; she said it. She cries a lot, but she's so productive. Which I aspire to because I feel like I cry a lot and I'm really not productive at all. So, but anyway, like, but whose labor? I think also I think it casts aspersions on, for example, the people who are creating her merch and running things in the background. You know, I made a TikTok about this where I said I can hold both that Taylor is an artist that I really admire and is able to create music that touches the deepest part of my heart, but she's also a billionaire. I really can hold both of them. But I do think that holding both of them is calling out, saying like, nobody's in dispute, Taylor, that you work hard. But there are people in your downline who work harder than you. It just is the truth. This is one I don't think I've heard anyone talk about in Down Bad. The very first line of this song is "I forget how the West was won." I don't really feel like I should have to explain to an adult that no matter how awful your relationship was, no matter how bad it felt to be chased in that way, to be chased and then seemingly like left apart, like, man, do I want to know what this man did to her? But like, it doesn't compare to colonialism, and aligning the way that this man chased you and then left you to colonialism is tactless beyond belief. Yeah. And okay, this is the big one. You've heard people comment about this. I will link the TikTok that I made about this in the comments. Sorry, not in the comments, in the description if you really want to know. But it is basically what I'm going to say. In the song I Hate It Here, I want to go back to the 1830s without the racists. This line was meant to be innocuous. And I was not, I don't know. I don't think anyone seriously thinks that Taylor doesn't know how bad the 1830s were. I saw a lot of commentary being like, the 1830s weren't just racist. There were also slave owners and slave owners and cholera and women's rights issues. She knows. She knows. I think that she expected the word racist to mediate all of those things. And that she does not actually want to be there. In fact, she continues on in that song and says, hey, nostalgia is a lie. I don't actually want to go back to the 1830s. I do hear the criticism. My first, reading of this, when, listening to it for the first time, it felt like, oh, she added without the racists as a throwaway. And then my perspective changed because I listened to it again, and and close listened and really like linked those lyrics all together. To which I say, I think that her intentions were in the right place with this. I think that she was doing one of two things. A, she was just, again, making a statement that her real life is really hard and she wants to escape from it. To that I say, though, were there no other examples? Were there no other examples you could use that wouldn't center you as somehow being really knowledgeable about racism? And then again, this idea that, which is an idea I really understand, because I feel this way in so many ways, that like, you're around a dinner table and people are having a little silly game, but then you overthink and you say the weird thing, and now the game isn't fun anymore because you've made it weird or you've made it heavy. And again, like, why were there no other examples? Why do you, like, bringing up this example when she participates in white feminism, publicly dates Maddie Healy, which we'll talk about, and does other racially blunderous things, makes it feel like you only, like Taylor only brings up racism when it serves her, right? And then to say, I want to escape from my world because I'm constantly making it weird. Again, what are you escaping from, Taylor? You do experience a lot of trauma. You do experience a lot of criticism in an industry that isn't justified. But are you trying to escape from the critique of dating someone who, for better or worse, has a public perception of racism? Were there not better ways to handle that? I I don't know. And then I think the last thing in this category is the song "But Daddy, I Love Him," which I will begin by saying I really like. I really like this song, and in a vacuum, it would be at the top of every playlist that I create for the rest of time. There's a couple interpretations here. Some people are saying that it's about Christian conservatives who won't leave her alone about stupid stuff. Some people are, the Gaylors are back. And while this isn't an analysis I agree with, I respect it. Some people are saying that it's her attempt to come out of the closet and align herself with her quote secret queer identity. I disagree, but some people have said that. How this landed for me, however, and how I think it landed for a lot of people was this: how dare you? I can date whomever I please. And I just think that that's a weird hill to die on if the person you're dating is irrefutably awful. And when you're dating someone who has a public perception of racism, I think it becomes your fans, A, get to tell you that they think you're screwing up, and B, I think it becomes your job to either A, apologize, or B, set the record straight, neither of which she's done. And like it or not, whatever the intent was, because the more I listen to it, the more I do think, you know what, I actually do think the goal of this was to talk about the Christian conservatives who have made her boogeyman in a weird way, but it's not how it was received. And at what point do you come out and say, this isn't what I meant, I'm so sorry to anyone who I offended? And I think that culminates for me my thoughts on this whole album. She, to an extent, in I Can Fix Him, No Really I Can, in her very last sign, and she says, whoa, maybe I can't, she like sort of takes account and is like, no, were all right, he's a terrible person, he sort of sucks, and that she couldn't fix him. But that's not an apology. And it feels like it's the first time that Taylor has been asked very specifically to contend with her whiteness and the fact that she benefits from it. And she loses the plot really fast. And instead it honestly feels like she gaslights us by saying we're the problem for calling her out. Yeah. Okay, to finish up, a psychiatrist got in my comments one day to talk about how when you're in a manic state, you do a lot of things that are really harmful. I have never been manic, but I have been severely depressed. To that I say, I was sick is only an excuse that white people get to use. We cannot pathologize racism. In the deepest trenches of my sorrow, I have lashed out at people, don't get me wrong, but I have never lashed out at people in ways that are racially motivated. And the thing is that people of color don't ever get to separate their ill health or their ill mental health from their race. So I don't understand why this might excuse Taylor from her behavior in this moment. No amount of mania justifies dating a racist. It might explain it, but it doesn't justify it. And I actually think Kanye is an interesting parallel here. And before somebody says something, I'm not a Kanye fan. I think he is and I have no defense for him. But I think it's really clear to me in the ways that we talk about him Kanye is a man with bipolar disorder, who is suffering a long time manic episode in the public eye. Um, and nobody is talking about his mania when he gets on the internet and says homophobic, anti-black, and anti-Semitic things. Nobody's excusing that. He doesn't get to use his illness as a shield. So why are we trying to do that for Taylor? It's starting to feel frustrating. I think the very first time that Taylor made a very public racial blunder was with Nicki Minaj and was it the MTAs or the VMAs? I want to say it was the MTAs, with Nicki Minaj complaining about that the industry is racist and Taylor making it about her, but she apologized. But we keep letting her make these mistakes. But for whatever reason, Kanye is done for good, right? Now, I think that there is something to be said about the difference between a racist person and racist actions. I think that Kanye is racist. I think to the core of his beliefs, he is an anti-black person. I think Taylor is a white woman who benefits from privilege and often weaponizes her privilege, but that her racial blunders are that they're racial blunders. I don't believe that she actually wants to harm people of color. And that I think, quite frankly, she just doesn't have enough people around her to guide her on the anti-racist journey that we should have all had to take by now. I mean, she's 34. I don't know. All that to say is that I think it's perhaps time for Tree Payne and Taylor to take a break from each other. The Tree Payne is Taylor's publicist, longtime publicist, and Tree Payne has always, I think, been on the side of don't get involved whenever Taylor starts accruing like bad press for things. And I think what I have to say to that is that it's time for Taylor to start stepping up and apologizing when people feel she's like done wrong things. It's not 2000. It's not the era where people could get away with just being like quietly wrong about things. I think the emergence of things like TikTok and social media means that people are more socially aware and expect the people who they spend their money on. I can say this because I've spent $105 on Taylor just in the last 12 days. They expect the people that they spend their money on to share their values, and I don't think that that's unfair. And probably the last thing I'll say on this is that it's always been really clear to me that Taylor is an extremely well-read person. Extremely well-read. Clearly, she reads people like Aristotle. She reads the Great Lakes poets. I wouldn't be surprised if she's read all of the classics. And without sounding classist, because that really is not my intent, for me, it's clear that she's never been to college. Not because I think her interpretation of these classics are wrong. I actually think that she's an extremely smart person. But college often rounds out your reading. College is the place where you get introduced to revolutionaries like Audre Lorde or Bell Hooks. It's unclear to me whether or not Taylor is actually reading these people, because I don't know, it's unclear to me that she's ever been introduced to these people. And theoretically, the only people around who are hearing her ideas and listening to her songs are Aaron Dessner and Jack Antonoff, who are both white, and then maybe her mom and Travis Kelce, who are also both white. I think she needs some black and brown academics around to help her mediate the things that she's reading and hopefully help her expand her audience. Because I am a black woman who finds so many things to align with in Taylor's music. The music is not for mediocre white women. I think that's a really stupid criticism. But I do think that Taylor has failed her potential black audience in many ways, and that is why there is a reticence amongst a few other things that we could talk about, but I don't want to in this video because it's already been over an hour, that we could talk about, but like it's amongst the reasons why black people seem to be so reticent to take on Taylor's music in earnest. So all that said, to close, am I done with Taylor? No. Not at all. I still really like her. I still think she's a phenomenal musician, a phenomenal artist, a phenomenal performer. From what I can tell of her, she does actually seem like a genuinely really nice person that's just getting bad advice. And I think that these are mistakes, not they're not representative of her character. And so I'm, at least for now, willing to give her a few more chances. In fact, I am actively trying to get 2 accessible seats for my friend and I, who both have POTS, for any remaining US tour nights. So if anyone from Taylor Nation is watching, hit a girl up. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. This was a long video. I didn't realize it was going to be this long, but I had a lot of things to say. If you want to talk about it more, join me in the comments or go follow me on TikTok and sometimes Instagram and a lot of the time Twitter. And we'll keep talking about this. Well, let's keep the discussion coming in the comments. Bye!
I can't believe that you came into my life. You made me feel again. Now it's my turn. You say you've always been a little bit shy, but I can put an end to your fears. Let me show you a place